What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Gut Check Radio. It's your host, Dr. Nick here. And before we get into the details and the nitty-gritty of today's episode, which will be part 3 in my 13-part series, I know what you guys are thinking, Nick, 13 parts isn't enough. You need to have 30. I'm kidding. I know most of you are like, why in the world are you having 13 different parts to address your thyroid series? And I can unpack that fully, but I think it is really crucial to break them down in that many series. And I talk about so many things in each of the different 13 episodes. It's just different ways of framing and different ways of approaching how to address thyroid health, because there's a lot of information on the internet about the thyroid. And some of it I don't personally agree with, and I agree with elements of some, and I form my own opinions. And that's really why you should start a podcast, is if you have opinions that differ from somebody else's, because if your opinions were the same as someone else's, there really would be no need to have a podcast with there. I heard someone say once that really a lot of people start podcasts just for their own form of therapy. And I would say, yep, that's pretty right. So we're headed into the holiday season this time of year. If you're listening to it when the episode drops, or we are probably in the depths of the holiday season. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and how we think about our health in context of the holidays. And it's always fascinating to work with people one-on-one. You know, the theme of this podcast, the uniqueness of the human experience. It's always very neat to work with people one-on-one, because you get a glimpse into that uniqueness, into how they view their health throughout the Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Some people decide to go completely off the rails, kind of eat whatever they want all the time for that entire 6-week period. Okay. Some people decide to be completely on it for that entire 6 weeks, and they keep their bedtime consistent. On New Year's, they're in bed at 9 p.m., which, hey, I mean, it's probably the New Year's in Europe or another time zone. And some people decide to keep eating their same food. Completely understandable. I've come to this conclusion that I think you can have your both. I think you can have cake and eat it too. And I will use the analogy of a bank account. You can only withdraw up to the amount of money that you've deposited. So if you've deposited $120 in your account, you can withdraw up to $120. You can withdraw more, but you'll get hit with an overdraft fee. So then you'll owe more. So then you probably shouldn't do that. Here I am also giving personal finance tips. And tip to you, if you haven't listened, I actually was a finance major, so I have some credibility, right? Totally kidding. I wouldn't ask me any personal finance advice, let alone health. Here I'm talking about. But I look at our health throughout the holidays as the same way. You know, hopefully you've been making lots of deposits into your health over the course of the year. I'm not talking about actual health savings. I'm like tangible deposits, or actually intangible deposits into your health, with your sleep, your nutrition, your exercise, your movement, your purpose, stress management. You've been making so many deposits in that this next 6 weeks, you know, you're probably going to be around people, family members you don't see that often, maybe friends you don't see that often. This is the time of celebration, of rest, of recuperation. The phrase having fun, I don't love that phrase. I think it's too general, but it's kind of what it is. So I tell what I'm telling all my patients is, hey, hopefully you've made a lot of deposits up to the season, and now you get to make some withdrawals. Now you get to enjoy yourself over this next 6-week period within reason. You know, obviously, like I said, you can overdraft, you can withdraw too much money, and I've definitely seen people do that, as I've also done that myself. But I think through this season of life, this is a very opportune time for all of us out there to withdraw and have some fun. You know, the whole reason you save for retirement or save for a vacation is so that one day you can use the money you save for. And the whole reason that we're building up our health reserves, we're building up our health savings account, we put in deposits into our health, is that at one point we can withdraw it and use our health to enjoy life, to serve others, to serve in the name of the Lord, depending on what your affiliations are. And for those of you who are not even in that camp, I just lost a lot of my audience. But hey, that's why I think we should all be healthy. But before I lose much more of my listeners, you know, sit back, relax, and enjoy this part 3 of the thyroid series. We're going to talk about a huge part of a huge part of a deposit into your health, and that's the idea of stress management. What does the word stress mean? We will unpack all that and more. Welcome to Gut Check Radio, the holistic health podcast where we explore the uniqueness of the human experience to help you navigate your health journey. I'm Nick Belden, a chiropractic physician and functional medicine practitioner. And you all know what's coming next, but the information provided in this podcast is for educational entertainment purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, cure, or treat any disease, and do not apply any of the information here without first speaking with your physician. 13 tips to heal your thyroid, segment 3. We're going to talk about the idea of stress and stress management and why you necessarily don't need to reduce stress, but you need to do something else. Tip 3, You don't need to reduce your stress. And for those of you listening on the podcast, what I have in this frame here is I have two pictures. I have a picture of, we'll call it a 32-ounce Yeti. So go ahead and picture in your minds this large mug that you are putting your sweet elixirs into, maybe each morning or maybe each evening. I don't know. Some of y'all get crazy with your caffeine intake. So you have that. You have a 32-ounce mug. But at the same time, next to it, you have a little 1-ounce shot glass Dixie cup or 1-ounce serving of water, depending on what your preferences are, right? I don't want to make any insinuations out there. And so what I think about this a lot, this idea of stress. And, I think what happens is so many of us are told we need to reduce. It's always cut back, reduce stress, do yoga, meditation, just find ways to reduce your stress. And I don't necessarily think that is a great answer. I think really what more so we need to discuss is not necessarily reducing your stress, but to use these two cup analogies, we need to find ways to alter your perception of that stress. So again, I want you all, for the duration of this video, to keep two big things in common. Number one, I want you to picture a 32-ounce mason jar, or 32-ounce Yeti, again, whatever your brand recognition is, or a 1-ounce Dixie or shot glass. I want you to keep those two things in mind when it comes to thyroid, because people are telling you everywhere, if you have Hashimoto's, if you have low thyroid, you need, like I said, you need to meditate all day. You need to make sure you never have caffeine because it'll wreck your hormones, because it'll cause stress. That's way too simplistic. We need to have a better model for how we work with the idea of stress and adaptation. I want you to see this picture here. And so what we have here is, I want you to picture, so we have a 32-ounce mug, like I said, and then a 1-ounce cup. And I want you to picture that there is 4 ounces of liquid. You can put 4 ounces in the 32-ounce mug and 4 ounces into the 2-ounce glass or 1-ounce glass. It's the same amount of liquid, okay? Same amount of liquid. And we'll call it the same amount of stress. So whatever stress it is, maybe it's work stress. So it's work stress. It's the same amount of stress for cup A and cup B, for person A and person B. Same amount of stress, same amount of liquid. The person, we'll call it person A or cup A, has 32 ounces of liquid it can hold. So 4 ounces in a 32-ounce mug is about a 16th of my or is an eighth, excuse me. Sorry, it's an eighth. My math should be better. It's an eighth full. That's hardly visible, but hardly. Versus the person B or cup B that only can hold 1 ounce. If you tried to put 4 ounces of liquid in there, what would happen? The cup would spill over 4 times over. What am I using this to say for? You have the same amount of stress, the same amount of liquid in a different size cup. In cup A, 4 ounces of liquid almost does nothing. It's barely visible. In cup B, water completely overflows the cup and it's spilling out everywhere. Person A barely perceives that amount of liquid as a stress, and person B, cup B, perceives it as an overwhelming amount of stress, so much so they can't even tolerate it. All right, what am I using this analogy for? Because as I've already alluded to, the liquid in the cup analogy here equals the amount of stress you're experiencing. And the size of the cup equals something I like to call your stress tolerance. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of what the word tolerance means. It's actually how much you can handle. How much stress, how much things that can come out your day every day, how many things can you handle at any given moment? And that is your stress tolerance, your ability to handle the existing stressors in your life. And for person A, 4 ounces of stress in their 32-ounce tolerance cup is nothing. That's maybe the person who is very sound sleep hygiene, is very on it nutritionally, had a very great upbringing, has a great attitude, and is grateful for everything. They look at every challenge as a challenge, not necessarily something happening to them, but something happening for them, right? And we'll talk about that more in a second. And then in person B and cup B and 1 ounces, when 4 ounces overflows them, that's, some of you maybe can imagine, that's when you've ever had maybe a night of poor sleep that just sends you over the edge, or maybe you're stressed during a period of work and then you got sick because the stress of whatever else was on top of your work stress finally caused the cup to spill over and the liquid to spill out of the cup, and then symptoms happen. It is one of my core theories and core beliefs that really symptoms happen when stress exceeds tolerance. Now, some people in the rehab world sort of agree in that same vein, and that, when you hurt your knee or hurt your elbow and it's lifting, that's because your tissue or your body couldn't handle that load. It couldn't handle that stress. And you can apply that symptom exactly to thyroid things: weight gain, fatigue, eyebrow thinning, constipation, bloating, brain fog. All of those really boil down to a symptom that happens as a result of stress overflowing your stress tolerance cup. Why do some people get brain fog? Some people get bloated. I think that's really where the individual differences are most highlighted, meaning your upbringing, partially the genetic input. I don't love the G word, genetics, but sometimes, it does matter to a degree. I think those are really what play a factor in the symptom you get. But the fact that you got a symptom, I think is a bigger picture sign that your stress tolerance cup was overflowed. Again, so this is a core theme of why your thyroid symptoms are happening at whatever season. Because when I work with people one-on-one, people will say, well, I've been doing XYZ thing for 15 years. Why did it all of a sudden just happen now? Because some people say their fatigue or weight gain just started happening. Some people can associate their fatigue to, hey, after I was specifically sick, after my pregnancy. Some people have very specific events when things started, which is that those instances are very big stressors in your stress tolerance cup. But for some people, it just happens what's called insidiously, which means really without knowing, it just sort of seemed to come on. And it's my theory that the symptoms happen when the stress, the liquid, overflows the cup, or the stress overflows the stress tolerance for you. So here's the question of the day, and I hope this question you've all been wondering and asking. Those who are watching on YouTube, you can see on the screen, is how do you increase the size of your cup? So many people, like I said, talk about how you reduce to liquid, get rid of liquid, get rid of liquid, get rid of liquid, get rid of liquid. Not only will that dehydrate you, also you should try and say get rid of liquid 5 times really fast, as I just did, and I failed miserably. So hopefully you can do better than I can. But if you get rid of too much liquid, not only are you going to be dehydrated, but this is not a fun way to live, because there are stressors that are sort of inherent in our being. What do I mean by that? That means if you're a parent, you're going to have the stress of your kids. That's sort of unavoidable. I mean, maybe, my gosh, some people out there can find ways to make that avoidable, but that's avoidable. Having a job, that will come with stress. Having a spouse, that comes with that added stress. The human existence, I'm gonna say some things that are going to show my sort of theological thinking. The element of existence is stressful. I mean, if those of you who have read Bible, read Scripture, it's consistently brought up that the mere existence, our being on this earth, there will be suffering, there will be pain. That is inevitable. And for those of you listening, again, maybe I just lost all my listeners, but one of the inevitabilities of living is suffering and pain will happen. But we can manage the ability to which we feel that suffering, that pain, with increasing the size of our stress tolerance cup. Because if you took away all your stress, you'd be in a bubble. You'd have no fun. I mean, think about the things in your life that were the most meaningful and you felt most on purpose, on call, were probably some of the hardest. Parenting, to allude to earlier, being in a relationship are so meaningful. Starting a business, going through graduate school, these really meaningful tasks are very stressful. I mean, no one will tell you that a marriage isn't stressful, that having kids isn't stressful, that starting a business isn't stressful. All those are incredibly stressful. It's all about increasing the size of your cup. Again, if we took away every stress from you, it wouldn't be a very fun and meaningful life. So we want to give you meaning in life, give you meaning, and not let your thyroid symptoms cripple you into not doing anything, into not going out with friends, to not being with family, to not serving others. We want to increase the size of your cup to be able to have you live and express and do more things in life. How do you do that, Nick? I'm glad you asked. I mentioned this earlier, but I want to lay it out now. Really, the main strategy is to engage in activities that alter your perception of stress. You want to engage in activities that alter your perception of stress. What that does is that allows your stress tolerance cup to get bigger, because then you can take on more as you perceive events that would typically be maybe cup overflowing in a 1 ounce mug to events that are only an 8 full in a 32 ounce cup. Again, that's what we're all trying to do here. And we break that down into 2 subcategories. The first category I like to call spiritual activities. And these are going to be things like prayer, scripture reading, being in community, meditation. Really what these things do most fundamentally, and then there's a myriad of things that all of these things do, but in the context of our symptoms and our health, and specifically when it comes to symptoms of the thyroid, they help alter our perception of stress. Especially when you're in prayer and scripture and in community, you have this real sense of you're not suffering for nothing. You're not suffering by yourself. You are amongst community, and if you're in the right community, you all are attempting to achieve the higher good. And that makes the perception of the things you're taking on, that much more likely that you can take them on. And a perfect example is high school sports or even middle school sports. Or anytime you played sports or even band, even any group activity as a kid, or for those of you out there that are in Greek life, for pledging fraternity or sorority, there were times in that where you just didn't want to be there. You had zero desire. They were not fun. They were not enjoyable. But there was something around being people who were also going through the same amount of suffering. They were all running suicides. They were all doing strange things fraternally. They were all having to practice their instrument hours after they really wanted to. And there's this idea of shared suffering. I mean, that's why group fitness does so well, right? It's this element of shared suffering. That community aspect is very hard to replicate. And you can get that from anywhere, from your fitness, from your church, from your small group. So many things you can get it from. But really on the spiritual side, it helps give you spiritual resilience. It helps you spiritually alter your perception of the stress. And you think, hey, there's a lot of tyranny happening in this world, but I got really good friends. I have a really good community. I have it pretty well considering what could be. Think about times thousands and thousands of years ago. There was no TV. There was no Stanley water bottles. There was no Oura rings as I'm wearing here. There wasn't all these things that allow us to live better, to live more hopefully. We can communicate with people using cell phones and technology across the world at an instant. It's such beauty that allows us to alter our perception of stress. So again, the spiritually driven ways to alter your perception of stress. Be in prayer, get out your Bible, read scripture, be in community, meditate. Anyone and for those of you that prayer and scripture reading doesn't tickle your fancy, be in community. I haven't met very many people who say that they don't need a sense of community. I have met a few select patients who have told me they feel like they don't need friends. But they actually tell me their spouse is their best friend. So they do need a friend. And for even one, sometimes can be enough community. But from my experience, community in and of itself totally alters our level of stress and makes it feel like there's more to this world than just the pure suffering from our symptoms, right? So it's not just about woe is me. I'm going to see some really hard things right now. It's not just about woe is me, what's going on in my life. Again, it's the reason we should work on our health is to be able to use it in the service and gratitude of others. So using these four things to give us spiritual resilience, it's so profound. It's going to do wonders for your health. The second sort of subcategory of activities you can engage in to alter your perception of stress, to give you that better cup, are going to be things, and I like to call the physiological category. These are going to be things that you can actually X's and O's do for your health. And these are the things that most people are familiar with, and probably most people are more likely to do if they're into being active or sort of preventative with their healthcare. And in the list, I'm gonna go one at a time. First one is gonna be hot-cold contrast. I mean, really what you can boil down these physiologically stress-altering tactics to is, as you do hard things, your perception of what's hard alters, and your perception of, again, suffering and stress changes as a result of doing hard things. And we all know when you get a feeling of accomplishment after you finished an event, it makes it that much more easier. It builds momentum for you to be able to take on hard things. And that's really what the first one, hot-cold therapy, does. If especially cold, it's just not fun. I mean, sometimes sauna can be really relaxing and very restorative, and more so is, where being in the cold is more stress-inducing, epinephrine, noradrenaline-inducing. But either one of them is physiologically, meaning within the body, perceived as a stressor. And it is the adaptation, it is the response to that stress. Some of you may have heard the term hormetic stress or hormesis. That's really what these things are. That in the body's response to the stress is when the building comes. It's just like building muscle, right? Actually, when you're lifting weights, you're causing a stress, micro tears within the muscle fibers. You're causing micro tears in muscle fibers. And your body has to then heal because of that stress. And it's the healing that, if given enough nutrition and given enough time to heal, allows the muscles to get bigger. So you stress the muscle, you eat, you rest, it gets bigger. So you stress and adapt, and then you improve. It's exactly what hot-cold is. You stress the body with hot or cold, and then the adaptation response, especially hormonally, and we don't need to get into all the fancy mechanisms of heat shock proteins, and even there's cold shock proteins, believe it or not, being discovered now. We can get into all the fancy mechanisms, but let's be honest, you all don't care about that. Some of you might, but we can say that for another podcast. But it is that response to the stressor that really makes it a very powerful activity. So if you're not taking part in any sort of hot-cold contrast now, I invite you. The one way you can probably most easily think about this is think about the climate in which you live in. Because not all of us have access to saunas, not all of us have access to cold plunges. but we all probably have access to the outdoors and a shower. Most of us. Okay. So you know those two things. So if you live, I'll use an example for me. I live in Arizona. So between hot, cold, there's one of those that I'm getting significantly less often, and that's cold. It's, right now in Arizona, it's not hot, but for the most part, Arizona's pretty hot. So I know my physiology has adapted to hot, meaning I can get the most adaptation from any times I can induce cold. It's getting colder here, and that's beneficial because showers, the shower temperature is very much driven by what's going on outside. So in the summer, it's very hard to get any sort of cold water. So at that instance, you want to invest in finding some way to get a cold plunge, or always get a friend who has a cold plunge. Get a friend who has a truck, right? Then you're always one helping other moves. Since I'm in Arizona, I know cold is the thing I need more. So I go out of my way to make sure that when I can use a cold shower now, I use it while it's cold enough in the morning. So that's one way. Versus if you're in Wisconsin in December, you might benefit from a sauna practice because your body is getting cold all the time, or even going outside, especially even in Arizona now, when it gets into be the 40s and sometimes even 30s in the morning. Go outside in, as I always tell people, as minimal clothing as you can handle, but as much clothing as is socially acceptable, whatever that means to you. So for me in Arizona, as it gets colder, again, to help my thyroid, to help it respond, to help my lab work that shows off Hashimoto's, is I will wear shorts and t-shirt. And as it gets really cold, I'll wear gloves, because your greatest sort of temperature sensation, especially the one that gets hardest to manage, is things that happen in the feet and the hands. So cover them, or even I always tell people, even it's okay to wear a hat, but expose, especially your torso, expose a lot of your torso and your legs to the temperature variation. That's going to be huge. That's why if you even go to a cryotherapy, a lot of times they'll have you wear gloves and socks and shoes, is because sometimes too much of the extremes on the nerve endings of the feet and hands could be detrimental. Again, could be, none of this is medical advice, but I think that is a great way to induce hot, cold contrast, is use the outdoors if you can, as minimally much clothing as you can handle, but in as much socially acceptable clothing as you can. Then in Arizona, in the summertime, it's a great time to induce heat, because you can go outside shirtless and maybe find some shade so the sun doesn't completely destroy you. You can obviously build up your sun tolerance. That's a great way to gauge what the environment looks like, and then can you use cold or hot to sort of induce that without needing fancier things. So hot, cold was the first element. The second activity to alter your perception of stress, to give you that bigger cup, is fasting. Fasting is a large umbrella term. And I think when most people hear fasting, they think of the intermittent 16-8 window, or not eating for 16 hours and eating in an 8-hour window. I consider that more time-restricted feeding than textbook fasting, and we can get into the semantics of that. But I think fasting, you could fast from anything. You could fast from coffee. You could fast from your phone. You could obviously fast from food. Fast from water. Maybe not recommend the latter one, but it's an option. Fasting is really, it's helping your body and your neurotransmitters and your hormones and your physiology adapt to the absence of something you physically thought you needed. And so again, it induces a stress of, if it's food, your body is used to having food at certain times. So when you don't give it food at those times, it's a stress. You'll get symptoms. You'll get headaches. You might get fatigue. You might get a little bit of some brain fog. Some people notice the complete opposite, which tells you sort of the state of what's going on within their gut microbiome. But really, it's giving up something you love and being willing to be open to the possibility of what might come. So if you look at any religious practice, there's an element of fasting. Obviously, Ramadan is the most prominent for the Islam and Muslim traditions. There is Lent for Catholics and certain elements of Christianity. And both of those are really they're an element of fasting, but they're fasting in an attempt to bring you closer to the thing that is highest. And for whatever your religious practices are, it's a great way to bring you closer to the idea of why you're on this earth. And what it does is it really alters your perception of, man, like life really is great, or I really have a lot going for me, or yes, I haven't had food for maybe 24 hours, but it's such a powerful tool to help you train physiologic resiliency. I mean, we didn't even get into the blood sugar perspective yet, but as your body isn't getting glucose exogenously, it has to use endogenous glucose, or as you're not eating glucose, your body then has to take it from your liver, takes it from your muscles, and both of them their muscles are pretty big capacity. And so your body gets used to running off of your own glucose and eventually your own stored fat if you should fast, or if you go to ketogenesis or ketogenic diet long enough, you go into ketosis. And either way, it's giving you a sense of resiliency and helping you do hard things. And again, anytime I fast for maybe 24 hours or more, it feels such a sense of accomplishment, and like I can take on more things subsequent days. Like life is less hard because I just willingly did something that's hard. And that's a huge element of even things like psychotherapy, or if you have phobia, and phobia therapy is and the person has to go through that phobia. So if they're afraid of flying, one of the ways in which they get over it is they have to fly. But if they're not at that level yet, you have to give the person enough of something. And I'm not a therapist, so it's just fun to have some conjecture on this. You have to give them enough of the stressor that they'll do it, but not too much to where it causes them to completely fall apart. So you have to give them just the right amount of stress, of fear, the way they can have an element of safety and then subsequently adapt so the next time they can take on more. So they go here, they feel safe, they wait a little bit, they go here, they feel safe, and then until they can make their way all the way up here. For those of you listening on audio only, I was just having my hand progressively go up as the person adapts to that environment. So fasting is a really good way to do that. Number 3, and people are going to ask what type of fasting. And honestly, my blanket advice for that is whatever type of fasting feels hard. And that doesn't mean go fast for 7 days. That's going to be hard for anybody, but within reason. I would say if the thought of skipping breakfast is hard, try skipping breakfast one day. If you've never fasted, don't fast for 72 hours. If you don't think you can, start with skipping breakfast. If you're someone who is adapted to skipping breakfast or only eating 2 meals a day, try fasting for 24 hours. If fasting for 24 hours is easy, try fasting for 36. I really think sometimes we overcomplicate it and can just be as simple as what type of fasting is challenging. I know for me, as someone who used to do 48-hour fasts, it's been a long time since I've fasted for 48 hours. It's probably been 3 or 4 years. So now when I even do a 24-hour fast, or when I skip one meal, that's challenging. So that tells you my body has adapted to its current state. So I can get a lot of benefit from fasting 24 hours now because it's hard compared to 4 years ago when I actually got to a point where not eating was it was almost a disorder. It was too easy not to eat. But now I have a different much healthier relationship with food, so I eat more often, and so now it's actually harder to fast. So there's actually more benefit from me fasting 24 hours now than maybe there was 3 or 4 years ago. So that's the second one. So the third portion is weight training. Why did I put weight training specifically related to any other exercise endeavor that I could have put? And I think it's because not only does weight training perfectly exemplify what it means to stress and then build from the stressor, but it's just really fun. Like I talked about, to literally build muscle is a stress on the muscle, and then it builds. So as you build muscle, you literally increase the stress tolerance cup that you have. So weight training, especially for thyroid symptoms, is a phenomenal tool to build resiliency, whether that's the compound movements of deadlifts, squats, lunges, presses, or if it's going to be dumbbell only, or if it's even body weight only, if it's even bands, any type of, so I probably should have worded it resistance training rather than weight training, but my personal bias is weight training because I think that's really fun. But any type of resistance exercise where you can add muscle mass, let's just be honest. I've never met someone who added muscle and said, you know what, I feel weaker, or I feel like stress is just, I feel like it hasn't helped my stress at all. So many people I know who add muscle mass become more resilient, both physically, but also mentally, because of the habits and behaviors. And it's hard to put on muscle. It is not easy by any means. It's easy in theory, more difficult in practice. But weight training is another phenomenal tool to induce your body to a decent amount of stress that you can then recover from. And same thing. At times, it should feel hard, but there's also some element of being consistent is actually hard. So if you're someone who's already very consistent with weight training, then follow your proper programming, and it's any program you follow consistently is going to give you better results. So if it's a 10 out of 10 program, but you can only do it 3 out of 10 times, probably not going to be as good as a 5 out of 10 program that you can do 10 out of 10 every time. Sorry, I'm getting way off track here, but I think weight training is a phenomenal tool to build physiological resiliency. Last one is breath work. I think of these 4, breath work is probably the one that you should not do unsupervised, in all honesty. Unfortunately, it's the one most of us do unsupervised, because by altering your levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your blood, you can induce some very short-term transient states that might be perceived as a little weird. So I would encourage you to either seek out someone who has experience in breath work. I mean, even things like yoga classes would be fantastic to introduce you to the idea of breath work. But if you're not currently doing some sort of breath work to improve your thyroid symptoms, you are missing out. Again, finding an element of breath work that is hard, that is challenging enough, but not challenging enough to where you feel like you have to pass out if you've gone that far, which I have. I would tell you did too much, but finding an element with which you can go right up to that precipice of difficult and easy. For those of you listening home, you have a fence, and the end of that fence is where it's too difficult, and inside the fence is where it's too easy. You want to get as close to the end of that fence as you can without feeling like it's going to completely tear you down. That's really where I feel where you can do the greatest amount of good through altering your stress. So my homework for those of you listening, maybe pick one from each. Pick one of the spiritual or the spiritually driven activities, prayer, scripture, community, meditation. Prioritize it. Pick one of the physiologically stressful demands of hot, cold, temperature contrast, fasting, weight training, breath work. Pick one from each side and be consistent with it. Another big tip I give any person, whether it's a patient or just someone I'm having a conversation with, as I think we, especially in America, we get into the habit of wanting to try everything at once because we want to fix whatever problem or suffering our current state immediately. And again, there's a lot of merit to going through the journey of conquering pain and suffering. There's incredible amounts of merit. Easier said than done, but my goodness, is there meaning behind that? And one way in which you can achieve that is by doing one intervention at a time to actually see if it works or not. So you say you take a supplement, say you start breath work, say you start being in community, have something you're monitoring, have your how would you rate your stress 1 to 10? Or if you're wearing an Oura ring, heart rate variability. If you're wearing a CGM, what happens to your glucose? So, stress alters glucose levels. So have a system of feedback that can really help you point it toward that highest thing that you're searching for of trying to increase your stress cup. If you take away nothing from this video, for those of you still listening, I appreciate it. Take away nothing from this video, and please like, comment, or subscribe if you're listening on YouTube or if you're listening on a podcast, and whether it's Apple, Stitcher, or Spotify. Subscribe and whatever. And if you'd like to leave us a review, that's super cool too. People always say it helps the channel grow. Let me tell you, it really does. Pick one, be consistent with it, and know that it shouldn't always be about just reducing stress, because reducing stress sometimes equates to reducing meaning. And you don't want to you don't want to hide from life. You want to show yourself. You want to be awakened, or probably better said, be awoken to the possibility of what could come from life. One of the ways in which you do that is taking on more things. But if your stress tolerance cup is low, it's hard to do that. So we need to increase your stress tolerance cup in order so you can take on more meaningfully inducing projects.